Hiya, welcome to my channel again. I'm Victoria, I'm 18, and this video is going to be all about internalized misogyny. Once again, please excuse what's going on with the lighting. It's not quite as bad as earlier, but it's still a bit weird. But anyway, so this is about internalized misogyny, as I said, and funnily enough, I haven't actually always thought that internalized misogyny has been that much of a problem, and I've not really sort of drawn much attention to it or sort of thought about it being a thing at all. But then in recent, probably in the last couple of years, I've sort of seen it and been like, this is a bit of a problem. And in the last few months, I've actually realised that it is something that we need to raise more awareness of, and it's something that we definitely need to talk about more. So initially I had this as a blog post, but then I wanted to do this video on it to sort of expand upon what I said and just to see if I get any kind of reaction. So we all know that sexism basically refers to prejudice, discrimination and stereotyping on the basis of the sexist, I don't know what I'm saying. And that is traditionally being against women, although as you can probably guess, misogyny does mean something similar, although it's not quite the same, because misogyny refers to the actual hatred of women, which can look very different and it can take place in different forms, but typically it's by a man in cases of unequal power balances in relationships, simply dissing women, or in extreme cases it can even be sexual assault, which is actually quite common, which is just awful. But yeah, if you hear someone say, oh bloody women, or women are stupid, or women can't drive, and they sort of say it in this really derogatory way, you may not realise it, but in most cases, unless if it's a joke, which I don't know, but in most cases it is going to be some kind of misogyny. Therefore, you'd think in most cases women wouldn't sort of exhibit that kind of behaviour onto their own kind, because sort of thinking about it on the surface, you might sort of think, why would a woman have a hatred against another woman because they're a woman? It just doesn't seem to make sense. However, when you look at things in society and how sort of people sort of talk about each other, you should sort of come to realise that it's actually quite a big problem. So a typical example, which I think is actually really relevant to sort of people my age, is slut shaming. So all the time you can probably hear men accusing other women of being sluts, sort of shaming their sort of sexual activity. Maybe not explicitly, but it does happen. However, as well as that, you also hear women sort of accusing other women of being sluts, whether it's based on what they're wearing, who they're sort of, sleeping with, and so on. And I'll get into why that could be in a bit, but that's just an example. Another sort of classic example is when women are like, I am not like the other girls. And yep, that was me when I was younger. I used to maybe not say it, but I've definitely liked posts which have said, or sort of carried that message. And when you think about it, it's really not that good, because you get sort of people being like, oh well, I'm different to most women, I'm better, and that can kind of imply it in a way of how they behave. It can imply it in a way when they want to sort of be in a relationship and they think that they're better than other women. Or it can even sort of be an insult against sort of the whole femininity, because they're like, oh, I'm not feminine, I don't wear sort of girly clothing, I don't wear revealing clothing, I dress like this, I don't wear makeup, which is great. If you don't want to wear makeup, that's fine. All girls do what you want, literally. But when you're sort of going against femininity because you're sort of feeling that is a bad thing in some cases, especially when you boast about the fact that you're not like other girls. Because when you think about it, what's wrong with girls? What's wrong with femininity? There is nothing. So yeah, that kind of hope shows why internalized misogyny is a thing and why it's a problem that needs addressing. So there's sort of a perfect environment for misogyny to take place is the workplace. I mean, almost like biologically, if that was a thing. But basically, there's so much inequality which is still really apparent in the workplace today. The gender pay gap in the UK as of 2019 on average, women earn 9% less than men. While of course the jobs which pay like the highest salaries, generally speaking, the gender pay gap's going to be worse than that. And this is the case, there's a gender pay gap in all countries, I think, all industries, or most industries, and obviously it does vary, but you know, if you're in England and you're thinking, oh well, like feminism, you know, equality and that is fine now, we don't really need feminism, then think again, because there is so much inequality still. So, as well as this, the 10 richest people in the world are all going to be men, and this is unlikely that this is the natural cause, and instead it sort of just shows how hard it is for a woman to get into a high position, and that's most likely because of like the patriarchy and like how sort of women have been taught to sort of not, you know, be personally strong and sort of be as not resilient, but sort of dominant, I guess, in order to get themselves into the top positions, and how they've sort of been taught to shy away, you know, historically. And I think that's how it sort of stems from. And however, this can sort of link on to internalized misogyny, because then often if a woman gets into a high position, because that does happen, you do see women in highly paid positions, but it's, you know, important to remember that generally it's not as, you know, high for women than it is for men. But when a woman does get into that position, then firstly they're probably seen as a threat to other men, because it's like all of a sudden they're not only competing against other men, but they're now kind of having to begin to compete against women as well. But it's also a threat for other women, you know, whether they're in that high position and it's like, oh no, you know, more people are competing against me, or if they're not in a high position and then they sort of feel, oh gosh, she's doing better than me, and it might be jealousy, it might be because the woman sort of feels that they can't be as dominant or as sort of forceful because of how they've been taught and that, which can lead to sort of semi-aggressive behaviours, I guess, towards other women, you know, whether they're sort of getting that high position, and it begins to, you know, lead to accusations of sort of being a bitch, being sort of too on it, and it is basically internalized misogyny. Now, saying this, it's important to realise that with the gender pay gap, with sort of everything, is actually, I wouldn't say it's anybody's fault personally, but it's just a sort of system that we've sort of been born into. It's been there for fucking years, and it's just something that we need to recognise in, so we can sort of gradually begin to work together to sort of begin dismantling it. That sounds really ambitious, but yeah. But obviously internalized misogyny doesn't just take place at the workforce. If it just happened there, then nowhere else, then I think life for a lot of people would be easier, but you can't go away from it that easily, because patriarchy has basically meant that women are more competitive in other ways as well as just work, because it does all sort of link onto each other, and this can lead to something which is known as bitching. Now, this is a two-edged sword in a way, because not only does it mean that women are sometimes unnecessarily critical of each other because of certain expectations and whatever, it also means that now there's this phrase which is specifically relating to women called bitching, because you don't sort of think of a man bitching about another man, but it's generally women. And of course, as well as that, women are sort of accused as being bitches by other men, but also of by other women. Now, the definition of bitching, in case anyone's interested, this is just like the first definition I got online, is the action or practice of making spitefully critical comments. Now, that sounds pretty horrible, but it basically is what bitching is. Now, I think just as an example of what bitching could be, or sort of at least bitching about others, is something as simple as looks. Like sometimes, if you go on a beach and you just, in the summer, and you just hear like other women sort of, if someone's bigger than them, they're like, oh, they shouldn't be wearing this. If someone's older than them, it's like, oh, they shouldn't be wearing that, because of ageism and sort of expectations that you shouldn't be dressing a certain way after a certain age as a woman, and that you shouldn't be proud of your body if you're of a certain size. And then if someone's got sort of more typically desirable aspects, then often they're bitched about as well, because it's like possibly jealousy, possibly sort of feeling that the other woman's not as good as them, so it sort of leads to sort of derogatory and unpleasant words towards others to make a woman feel better about themselves. That's just like a possible explanation. But if you've not heard somebody saying something unpleasant about how somebody looks when there's actually nothing at all wrong with how that person looks, and you're a woman, then count yourself as extremely lucky, but I'm not sure if you're real. But by the way, whatever sort of body you have, whatever you look like, you are perfect as you are, and if someone says otherwise, then just ignore it. It's not true, and it's just unfortunate that society, not even society, but we've just sort of been conditioned to believe that we're not good enough. And so finally, which I've already mentioned at the beginning of this video, is internalized misogyny related to sort of slut shaming. So we know with men, if they have an active sex life, it's definitely seen as something desirable. They're sort of bold, strong players, and they're sort of used in such positive ways, and you could probably get men sort of boasting about it with their mates in the pub, and it's just something that men are not slightly ashamed of. However, it's really different for women, and if a woman sort of has an active sex life, then instead of sort of being seen in a positive way, they're just deemed as basically sluts, slags, impure, unworthy, just to name a few sort of labels. And that is, men sort of call them that, but also other women do quite a bit. And not only this, but even if you don't have an active sex life as a woman, that's also something that you shouldn't be proud of, and you're sort of labelled as prude, conservative, old-fashioned and whatever. So basically whatever you choose to do, it's just, you can't really win. And not only this, but it doesn't even just relate to your actual sex life, but it's relating to how you dress as well. If a woman wears revealing clothing, often they're sort of slut-shamed by other men, but also by other women. And I think that's just because of how the system sort of taught women that they shouldn't wear, be overly revealing, and they should sort of commit to themselves and sort of cover up. And when another woman sees someone else not doing that, it could just be because they've been taught that it's a bad thing to wear revealing clothing. But as well as that, I think it could be some sort of internal jealousy, possibly, that some women feel confident doing that, especially if they've not got the sort of perfectly desirable body, which in reality barely anybody has anyway. And it could be a sort of feeling that they almost wish that they could do that themselves, I guess. And as well as that, I just thought I'd mention that internalized misogyny is not just women bitching about other women or being critical about other women, but often it's about themselves. Because if you ask any woman how they sort of, who has an active sex life, for example, how they feel about that, their chances are they're going to be embarrassed about it rather than being proud of it, which sort of, it sort of explains itself. And then often as well, I feel women, more so than men, are more overly critical about themselves because we're sort of taught to be less confident, and sometimes men can be a little bit overly confident, but certainly not always, definitely not. But with women, I think generally speaking, they're a lot less confident because, you know, having like a, you know, strong dominant personality is seen as something that's not good, not desirable. So yeah, I've sort of gone on a bit of tangent here, but back to the sex life thing. I feel like that's something that's definitely important for us to bear in mind, because when you think about it, it definitely affects, you know, if you're my sort of age, I think it does definitely affect you. And I just think that, you know, whatever you choose to do, you know, you're not a bad person for it. There's nothing wrong with you for what you choose to do, and like, you know, just don't be ashamed of it. So thank you for watching this video. I know it's far from perfect and there's far more things I could have mentioned. It's barely scratched the surface regarding sexism, I know that, but it's just one specific issue that I wanted to focus on today. Please like comment on the video if you think there's any sort of ways I could improve, and that, which I'm sure there's like millions of ways I could. If you like the video, then please give it a thumbs up. Please comment as well, possibly, and it would be cool if you subscribe. Thank you for watching. I hope you have a good new year, because it's like New Year's Eve, and yeah, thank you. Bye for now. Oh, and one more thing I forgot to mention is that I just thought it's important, like, to be aware of this, talk to other people about it if you sort of see it as being a bit of a problem, especially if it's among sort of friends and that, because it's quite easy to sort of, you know, just, you know, kind of comment on it. Just, you know, you don't have to say that much about it, but just sort of say something, and people will sort of question, like, the way they're feeling about it, because at the end of the day, women do need to sort of work together rather than against each other, because I don't think that's going to achieve anything. And if we work together and we realise like why we sometimes sort of feel, you know, bad about ourselves and bad about others, and we realise that that's sort of part of internalized misogyny, that way we can sort of work slowly to reduce it.